Well, good morning. Thanks for joining us this Sunday. You know, since the last time we were here, the calendar has turned to May. The Michigan legislature has a busy schedule this month with some key items still needing action. Today we'll get a UP Democratic perspective on those issues, and it starts right now.
From TV6, this is The Ryan Report. Here's your host, Don Ryan.
Well, this past November, Sarah Cambenzi won a special election to replace the late John Kivala as representative from the 109th District, which includes much of Marquette County and all of Alger, Luce, and Schoolcraft counties. Representative Cambenzi served as a Marquette City Commissioner and worked for the Marquette Public Schools as the Director of Adult Education. She has a bachelor's in education and a master's in public administration from NMU. She's also been working toward a PhD in environmental and energy policy. Representative Cambenzi now has about 5 months on the job, so this seemed like a good time to get an update on how her new assignment is going. Representative Cambenzi, welcome to the Ryan Report.
Thank you. Thanks.
Nice to have you with us.
Yes.
So you've been on the job for about 5 years. So you not only had to start as a new legislator, but you also had to do it in the middle of the term.
Yes.
And how has it been going so far?
You know, it was good. Having that local experience coming on made all the difference in terms of getting in, getting started, not feeling like I was the new kid on the block. But now that we're into budget season, you know, I'm seeing a shift in terms of positioning for legislation, some legislation getting held up. Now we're into the thick of it, and so it's tooth or nail. Yep.
Do you feel you were kind of welcomed by your colleagues?
Absolutely. You know, one of the best things, you know, I'll never forget is the first day I was on the floor. You know, you're looking at the buttons, what to press, how everything works, and I would say the majority of the people from the other side of the aisle, the right side, came over and welcomed me, shared a story about John, and just said, you know, we're glad to have you here. So.
Okay. And you also had to put a staff together and
did.
just get organized very quickly.
Yes.
And now you have to spend, what, 3-4 nights a week in Lansing?
That's right, yep.
You've worked out some living arrangements,
yes.
I assume?
Yep.
Okay. And your committee assignments are agriculture, local government, and natural resources. Are you happy
Yes.
with those? They seem very appropriate for
Yes.
your background.
Yeah, they are. There's a lot going on in natural resources, and that really, they're issues that are close to our district, close to the UP, very relevant. Local government, you know, a lot of the issues you'd think you'd see there, some of them get kicked off to competitiveness or some other committees, so we haven't had the chance to really kind of delve into too many things that I was familiar with at the local level. And certainly agriculture, I think there's more than I realized in my 4 counties in the district to help deal with, whether it's farming, forestry, all of that falls under ag. So,
You know, and perhaps getting back to what you were talking about a moment ago, I think most legislators go to Lansing with a pretty independent kind of attitude,
yep.
but they eventually realize that they're also part of a caucus, be it Democrat or Republican, and there's some expectation there that, you know, you're going to support your party's position and you have your own positions. Is that a fair statement? And how are you handling that?
Yeah, I think, you know, coming into the special election, certainly the Democratic caucus from Lansing stepped up. They were very involved, and, you know, I said right away, you know, please, I can't tell you what to do, but, you know, don't make me into a candidate I haven't been. We're independent in the UP. You know, I've been an elected official for quite a few years, and, you know, I want to be who I want to be. And they kind of let me alone. Now that I'm there and we're voting, I think they understand that not every vote I'm going to take with them. A lot of times you'll see the UP reps voting together. You'll see us working on legislation together and resolutions, and I think it carries a tradition, and certainly something John was very proud of, that we all work together and we stick together. There's not a lot of us, and if we want stuff done, we have to do it.
And I was going to ask you about that, but you've kind of answered it, but it's still working? The UP legislators working together?
It is. You know, I had a resolution to help support the reopening of the Empire Mine. You know, our office called Tom's, and we just said, you know, could you please introduce this on the Senate side? We need your help. If both of us are pushing from both angles, we feel like it'll kind of get some legs and get off the ground, and sure enough, we'll be voting on it Tuesday. The Senate voted on it last week, and there you go.
And that's been one of the interesting issues out there, the fact that the Cliff CEO has said, you know, if I see community support, I am considering reopening the Empire Mine. I know that you actually are going to be part of a delegation that, a small group that actually goes to Cleveland and meets with him.
Yep.
Are you prepared for that?
I am. I think the last several years, you know, I really remember what it was like as a kid when we had the shutdowns in the early 80s. You know, I remember kids walking out of my class, and I remember feeling, gosh, my friends aren't going to come back. And you know, getting older and kind of figuring out how important mining was to our region, and certainly watching, you know, the Empire Mine, which was set to kind of produce the Mustang pellet, watching that go to Minnesota a few years ago and saying, you know, we can do more and we can be advocates and we're not out of ore. It's part of one of our, you know, staple industries, and really kind of getting involved in it. And I think that's why when they looked at, you know, what kind of a team do we want to put together, you know, I think I've been advocating for it for a while. So,
do you feel the community has done enough to demonstrate that they support the idea of reopening the mine?
Yeah, and I think the biggest thing was our city manager in Ishpeming, Mark Sloan. He put out a Facebook post, and I mean, we just watched, you know, thousands of people like it, share it, comment on it, and you know, he asked, you know, could you please send a comment to Mr. Gonclaves and say, we want the mine here, and they did, and that was amazing. And we know that, you know, that got passed on to everyone on Cliff's team down in Ohio, and I think it made a big impact.
What about the state, and not just legislatively, but the state government? Do you think they've done enough?
I think they are working, and it's a lot behind the scenes, but the MEDC, you know, they've been up kind of looking at, okay, what kinds of things do you need if you reinvest here? What are the costs, and how can we help with job creation, you know, kind of a jobs package to make sure that they're here not just for a year or two, but, you know, 15, 20 years down the road.
Right. Okay. Schools are a big issue. I want to talk about those in just a moment. We'll talk about schools when we return in 2 minutes on the Ryan Report. Our guest this morning is State Representative Sarah Cambenzi. Representative, you had a town hall meeting recently where school safety was the primary topic of discussion.
Yes.
You had some great people there. What was your takeaway from that session?
Well, the reason we did it, we've heard a lot about it, office calls, you know, people writing letters to us, but we wanted to get away from the gun debate, whether, you know, we're going to take away guns, create more legislation to monitor guns, whatever we're doing, and kind of look at what's causing this and get back to the root of the issue. And, you know, that is that, you know, we're not spending enough money on our schools. Michigan has one of the highest ratios of students to counselors, and really talking about how we can help those kids instead of just going after, you know, what was used to cause some of the school shootings.
One of the things where there's a lot of focus now, of course, is making schools safer in terms of, you know, better entry systems and maybe some cameras, some different things. Obviously, in your district, there must be a wide range of conditions as far as where schools stand in that process.
Absolutely. Some have really gone above and beyond without any state help, through small grants, through using general fund dollars to, you know, put in doors that don't have as much window space, create pendants, you know, in case there is an active shooter, to press it to connect with law enforcement faster. And then other districts really haven't done much simply because they don't have the funding.
And that's kind of the big debate that's going on now, and these different numbers kind of float out. 15 million. The Senate committee approved 18.5 million. In the discussion at your town hall meeting, the Marquette school superintendent made it clear that would not be enough to do the whole state. Wisconsin approved a bill now, a package where they'll have $100 million. So obviously that falls short.
It does.
Is the Michigan legislature and the whole state government giving enough priority to this issue?
If you ask me, I would say no. Many of my colleagues would say the same thing. Again, education is something I personally come from. I spent 10 years at the Marquette Area Public Schools, so it's close to my heart. certainly my working base, my knowledge base, and I can tell you that schools are doing everything they can to just keep smaller class sizes, the appropriate staff in place, but it is tough. I mean, we haven't put enough into just funding the overall budget of education in the last 10 years that we should have.
On the school safety issue, besides the security of the schools, obviously a big part is training administrators, staff members, teachers, and students in how to deal with this issue. And I think we're making some progress in that area, aren't we?
We are, and we have a lot of praise for our law enforcement officials. They've really stepped up and said, we're the ones that get called. We need to be part of this plan, and let us help train you with active shooter training. They've put in place the OK to Say hotline, which every call that they get, they do investigate to make sure that, if there is someone in their community, a student at school, you can call in anonymously, and they take that tip and investigate it to make sure that there is no threat. And I can tell you, just by hearing the numbers of calls they get, and hearing that our Captain Halpin with the Michigan State Police tell us that there were 3 calls recently, and one, that they investigated that if they didn't, very easily could have gone the other way.
Right. And that was here in the
makes a difference.
Upper Peninsula.
Yep.
The Marquette has had a police liaison officer for many years, and apparently that's been a very effective program.
Absolutely.
And perhaps some of the other school districts can begin to look in that direction. I think Marquette is even looking at possibly trying to add another officer.
Absolutely.
But so people understand, this is not an armed guard standing in the doorway, is it? This is much more than that.
Right. Yep. And when I worked for the schools, you would see our police liaison officer come in, just have conversations with kids, just be in the hallway, ask kids, how's your day going? Say hi to your mom. There's a relationship there, and I think from that point, kids feel more safe. I think kids feel like there is someone they can go to, and that law enforcement isn't necessarily against us or there to reprimand us, but they're there to help us. And so just that relationship alone and presence in the schools, I think, makes a big difference.
Okay. It's one of those issues you kind of hate to think, why are we here? But the problem is we are here.
We are.
And we have to take it seriously.
Yes.
We've got some more questions for you. We'll get to those in just a couple of minutes. Back with more on the Ryan Report 2 minutes from now. Again, we're talking with State Representative Sarah Cambenzi. The House has now passed a budget bill. You voted against that bill.
Yes. Yep.
What were your thoughts?
I guess my biggest thought was there are a lot of places in there where we saw cuts, line item cuts. One was with our prison system, and I wanted an answer. Obviously they're thinking of a prison to close. We just closed one. And they weren't willing to kind of give up that information in committee. And until I know that it's not Newberry or another prison in my district, I just said I'm not voting for it.
Okay. Higher education, the governor's proposal would have increased aid to schools in the neighborhood of $120 to $240 a student. School officials say that's not enough to even cover the basic increases. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, this increase would get us back to funding levels we needed probably in about 2009, and I think that's the concern, is that their costs go up 5% a year, and we're giving them now roughly about a 3% increase, so they're starting the year in the negative, and that's tough as a school board member, superintendent. You never want to cut more, and that's what they're typically faced with. And
we'll have to go through some of these pretty quickly, but the governor's budget also calls for a 2% increase in university funding. You have a university in your district, obviously.
Yep.
Do you think that's adequate?
I would say no. You're seeing universities get more creative in terms of what they're doing just to make ends meet. Looking at cutting back on programs. It's a concern. I think tuition has gone up to a point where a lot of kids are starting to say, is it worth me going, or should I kind of go into the trades or another field? So I think universities are at a breaking point where either we step up and fund them like we we traditionally have in Michigan, or we're going to see a decline in students going.
We're finding now that one of the biggest forces in economic development is the availability of talent, trained
Yes.
workforce.
Mm-hmm.
The governor has a talent plan. I think it's an issue that's been looked at in a lot of ways. But are we on the right track, and is Michigan moving fast enough along that track to begin to train the workers? I know there were
Yep.
jobs that aren't being filled because we don't have the trained people
Yes.
to do the job.
Yep. Yeah, we saw Foxconn, Amazon, both of those large companies didn't choose to come to Michigan because we didn't have the talent. And I think the less we put into education, the less we don't cultivate the good jobs that we have, and we go after these large corporations with large tax breaks and all of this. We're really kind of at a disadvantage in terms of attracting that talent and growing the talent from the kids we have in our schools up. And so I see the merit in the plan. I'd like to get back to, let's put it into our schools. Let's get kids the education they need. Let's let them choose the classes they want and kind of the career path to go on, more like it was when I went to school or you went to school, and start that way instead of kind of taking this money and trying to do it hocus pocus, just with one sector.
And we are finding, for example, in the area of career technical education, that
Yes.
it's making some very positive strides.
Yes, yep, and I'm very, very supportive of this aspect of it. There's a shortage right now, and I think anywhere you go, you're finding companies that are actually willing to send kids to college, send them to career and technical training programs to get 2 years of experience to come back and then work in the factories, the paper mills, as machinists, electrical engineers, all of that stuff. And that was unheard of a couple years ago. So their shortage, they can't operate without these skilled workers, means that they're actually moving forward and paying for them.
We have a lot of
there.
issues we don't have time to talk about,
Yes.
including roads and infrastructure and car insurance rates
Yes.
and all the rest. But so let me say this: this is an election year. You are running for re-election.
Yes, I am. Yep.
Right? And what are you going to be talking to voters about as far as why they should re-elect you?
I think the biggest thing is I work for the people. I think I've proven that I don't just work for the people that elected me, but I'm working for everyone out there in the 109th district. And the biggest thing I think people want is affordability, and whether it's car insurance, whether it's health care, whether it's they're tired of paying extra millages for roads and schools. People want responsibility, and they want us to do better with what we have. And I think I've shown that I want to do that and that I can do that, and so I'll ask for their support again.
And this will be a big election for both parties, all the way
It will.
from governor and senators
It will.
to actually replacing the whole house, not replacing, but the whole
Yes.
house up for elections.
That's
So
right. Yep.
You'll be active in that as well, I'm sure.
Absolutely. Yep.
Well, thanks for coming in this
Yes,
morning and
thank
talking
you.
with us. We'll have to get you back when we have time to talk about some of the other issues as well.
Sounds good.
We'll be back with some other thoughts for you in just a couple of minutes. Well, lately I've found myself using the term gangbusters a lot. Phrases like, the Tigers batters really came on like gangbusters. But one day I got to thinking about the fact that some of the terms we use are really from the past, and young people have no idea what we're talking about. Gangbusters, for example, was a famous radio program that began in 1936 and aired until the 1950s. The sound of police sirens, guns, and screeching tires that opened the show were exciting and brought on the expression, coming on like gangbusters. Doesn't actually mean a lot to people who never heard the show. And so as I thought more about it, I realized there were a lot of other words and expressions that might leave young people wondering what we're talking about. Expressions like, he's really been through the ringer, might have meant something in the days of the old ringer-style washing machine, but doesn't mean much today. Or how about, you sound like a broken record? Well, back when music came on records, that phrase may have had some meaning, especially since records did get scratched and broken. But for those who only bought music on tapes or CDs, they just never had that experience, and some have never seen a record. There are phrases like, "I'm running out of steam," that were more meaningful when we had more engines that ran on steam. We all know what is meant when we use the CC designation in a letter or an email. It means we're copying someone. But how many young people know that it originated as the words carbon copy, when we would use a sheet of carbon paper to make an extra copy of a document that we were typing? How about the phrase, "This is a Kodak moment"? It must leave some young people wondering what we're talking about, since the days are fairly long past when 90% of the photos taken were on Kodak film. It's still around, but digital and photography now on our cell phones have really changed all that. And I wonder if kids today are still threatened by their parents with the phrase, "If you don't behave, I'm going to take you out to the woodshed." Clearly, for many, it would raise the question, what is a woodshed? And what are we going to do when we get there? There are other phrases that are just disappearing because of changing technology. Things like, "Don't touch that dial." It had a meaning when TV sets actually had a tuning dial. Or it's a song on the flip side. When music arrived on records, there was usually a song that was more popular on one side, but sometimes there was also something good on the flip side. Of course, speaking of music, mixtapes have also gone the way of the dinosaur. I guess it's not so much that young people don't understand what we're talking about when we use these terms. What it really means is that as older generations move on, the phrases will likely disappear. We'll have to wait to see what new ones take their place. But for now, don't touch that dial. I'll be back in a minute. A couple of closing reminders before we go. First, if you missed the show or want to see it again, you can do that at uppermichigansource.com. Today's show will be available starting at about noon tomorrow. I also want to remind you again that this show is now available as a live stream at that same internet address. That means you can watch it live and for a couple of hours later on your cell phone, your computer, or any device, no matter where you are. If you get a chance, check it out. Thanks to Representative Cambenzi for joining us this morning for an update on what's happening in Lansing. And thank you for being here. Let's plan to get together again next Sunday morning.